Yeah. Recording is in progress. Okay, so to get us started, a big welcome to everyone that's joining us for this AMA. My name is Kate Beecroft and I'm Ecosystem Lead at Centrifuge. Yeah, I'm here with Helena, who is Lead of Growth at Centrifuge. She's going to be co-hosting today. So say hi, Helena.
Hey everyone, welcome to the AMA.
Cool. And yes, we have Will Pankiewicz here, who is, I will do a very quick introduction in just a minute. For the majority of the call, we'd like you to keep yourselves muted because there will be many people and the recording will pick up all of your background noise. So unless you want to ask something, just stay on mute. As I just mentioned before, we're going to start off with some context setting presentations from our speakers, Will and Cassidy, and then we'll turn over to the questions that we've received from the sign-up form, from the forum, and from Twitter. As we're talking, absolutely feel free to put more questions in the chat and we'll be keeping an eye on them and figuring out, oh yeah, that's a really good one. We need to ensure that gets answered. And if you do want to ask your question yourself, please just let us know and that is more than welcome. So this is an Ask Me Anything. Although if you do ask something about, I don't know, feudal relations and between ancient villages and the Czech Republic, we might skip those questions and we'll kind of stick to questions related to Parachains, Kusama, Altair, Centrifuge. So just introducing Will Pankiewicz is Master of Validators at Parachain Technologies. Previously, he was lead blockchain engineer at Binance, and he's in the past been a founder and CEO of Ahania Capital, which is a digital asset investment firm, which, yeah, a very experienced panelist joining us tonight. But Will, can you just say a bit more about what Master of Validator means and what that entails?
Sure. So this is actually kind of a funny title, and it's actually on my passport at this point. So it's like an actual kind of title. But essentially, what I kind of work with is a lot of things kind of like external. So like Parity is kind of building out things in this kind of Polkadot Kusama ecosystem. And there's kind of like a lot of different entities kind of like building things out. Essentially, the focus that I kind of work on is things mostly kind of around like ecosystem infrastructure, helping kind of people actually run the things that run these different kind of blockchains and actually kind of supporting this. So this includes people that are running these validator nodes or validators, as it is for kind of Kusama in Polkadot, but also a little bit wider in the sense of like everyone that's kind of like building out these parachains or these kind of like substrate-based networks, just things related to kind of like infrastructure and integrations there. So also including things kind of like working with exchanges, wallets, custody providers, kind of just all of the above. And then I guess I could kind of start to talk about things related to Kusama here, and I have a bunch of slides that I could kind of start with.
Oh, great. I'll hand it over to you in just a minute. I would, before you start, I'll just introduce Cassidy really quickly. Cassidy is our other panelist here in this AMA. Cassidy is the token designer at Centrifuge. She's an expert in international finance, and her research on interest rates is regularly used by experts around the world. And luckily for us, she is using her insights and passion for blockchain technology to create solutions for people to borrow and lend money transparently and cost effectively, free of intermediaries and the inefficiencies of traditional finance with Centrifuge. Cassidy, do you want to say a quick hello and add anything that I've missed?
Well, hi everyone. Really excited for this next step we're taking with Altair and Kusama together. And really looking forward to the questions, although I hope you don't grill us quite too hard. But I guess really interested in just clarifying whatever we can for everyone here.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Okay, Will, I'll hand to you to start sharing.
Sure thing. Let's see here. sharing my screen. All right, can you see this fine? Does this look all right? Okay, so basically talking about kind of Kusama, what is Kusama, kind of like how does it relate to all these different things, and kind of like what is the role and values behind it, kind of how does it relate to like Altair and what Centrifuge is doing, basically kind of all of the above. And so as I kind of mentioned about myself, my name is Will. I'm the master of Validators at Parity. It's a funny title, but yeah. First things to kind of talk about are like substrate. What is substrate? How does that relate to Kusama? And then touching kind of like what Kusama actually is and kind of like the role in it and maybe like how people can get involved. So substrate is a industry-leading blockchain building framework. Basically, Parity kind of has built a lot of these different blockchain things in the past, namely kind of the Parity Ethereum client. But we've also built other things kind of like Zcash clients and Bitcoin clients. And then namely kind of like the Polkadot and Kusama kind of blockchains and clients as well. And like one thing we kind of noticed was just that like there's a lot of ways to do this more efficiently and streamline the process of actually like building out these blockchains. And so we encapsulated a lot of it into this framework that we call Substrate. And there's a lot of these different kinds of projects in the space, such as kind of Centrifuge actually utilizing these. And based on, there's some like third-party developer reports. So this is one by Electric Capital not too long ago. Like this Polkadot ecosystem is like one of the kind of largest developer ecosystems outside of Ethereum, which is really interesting to see. Mostly just because like the more people actually kind of building in the space with these things, the more kind of like network effects that you have, just because the main kind of I'd say big feature that we have here is this idea of kind of like interoperability, of having all these kind of like blockchains being able to communicate and interact with each other, having these just kind of new blockchain primitives for having this kind of like cross-chain kind of way to actually like build new things. And Kusama is a network that's built upon this. So we built Polkadot and Kusama with this substrate framework. Polkadot is kind of like the flagship thing that we're kind of building, but Kusama is, we call it this kind of canary network just because like this is kind of like where things will first go. It's very much kind of the bleeding edge of what we're actually kind of building out. And so some of the words at the bottom here are just kind of like some of the values that this kind of like actually incorporates. So it's very much kind of like this, what we want to have is this empowering all these kind of like teams and developers to build the things that they really want to build. And the idea here is that like we're just giving people the freedom to kind of like have the creativity to create these like solutions for these use cases that may have been hard to do before. Where kind of Kusama actually is differentiated between like Polkadot or other networks is we call it kind of like this canary network. And that moniker is mostly just because it's very much kind of this playground for like experimentation, for getting things up and running a lot quicker than elsewhere, and also just like a place to kind of iterate and kind of like validate ideas pretty quickly. And so this idea of kind of like canary network or like canary deployments isn't necessarily like new. In kind of like other typical software, there's this idea of kind of like canary deployments. And I just kind of ripped this image from one of the first things on Google, but the idea is that like if you're kind of like if you have big kind of code bases or big kind of like products and services, ones that serve kind of like millions, if not like billions of people, for example, whenever you have like new features and you have like new things that are maybe a little bit more experimental, it's like you don't just roll this out to everybody at once. You kind of like slowly kind of like introduce this to other people and users and that kind of thing. So generally, it's like if you have like a lot of people kind of using things, you might have this behind some type of like load balancer or just like a way to actually like route this to some type of like backend or microservice or something along those lines. And for like 98% of people, it'll kind of just direct it to maybe like the production instance of this. But if you want to do these like canary deployments, it might kind of like direct a small, maybe like 2% of your users to kind of like this newly deployed like canary kind of instance that has more maybe experimental features or more kind of just newer things. And kind of like from here, you could actually kind of get the feedback and kind of like iteration that you want of like, okay, people like this, maybe they didn't like this. maybe this broke, maybe this isn't quite as stable as you want it to be. It's just like your entire user base doesn't kind of blow up then or get mad at you that things aren't kind of as expected. And it's very much kind of like the way that of doing these iterations is where kind of Kusama comes into play. Just because whenever we want to actually create new features, new changes, we have almost, it creates this like staged rollout almost. So parity is also kind of, we run a couple of these different test nets. One of them is called Rococo, another is called West End. These are two networks that are, Rococo is mainly has been for testing parachains, but West End is just kind of like a long-standing testnet that we're running. And so generally, like the flow is like, okay, we'll make some changes, changes to maybe like the client itself, or maybe like a runtime, which is kind of like where the core logic of these blockchains kind of live. And we want to actually eventually get this into like Kusama and Polkadot, but we want to actually like verify that like this works under like a bunch of different kinds of conditions. And so generally rolling these out to these test nets works fine. Generally, we kind of like see, do things work? Do they not work? But those environments actually aren't like the best place to kind of like see that things kind of work, just because in kind of like working with blockchains in these fairly distributed environments that are like very diverse, where you have people like all around the globe kind of actually like running these things. They're running this on like a bunch of different kinds of like hardware. Maybe some is in the cloud, maybe some is in data centers, maybe people running in Docker. It's just kind of like this environment of like a lot of different kinds of factors that you need to kind of account for. And people behave very differently when there's actually kind of like value at stake and when they have skin in the game. And we've noticed this before where, for example, for West End, people would like run validators or these kind of like block producing nodes. But eventually, maybe at some point in time, they would just kind of like leave out of nowhere. And we've run into like finality issues a few times just because like too many people would leave at once, just because they have like no incentive to actually kind of like keep running these things, just because it's kind of like a test net. Whereas if you were to have actually kind of like things on the line of stake kind of like on the line there, this doesn't really make rational sense to do, just because it's like you're earning rewards by kind of like running this stuff, and you have a de-incentived because you would get slashed and lose funds if you kind of like leave in that kind of like abrupt manner. And so actually kind of like seeing that these things work in these real world environments is pretty hard to do unless you actually have kind of like value in like stake kind of like on the line there. And so that's kind of like where Kusama, but also kind of like all the parachains and substrate-based networks kind of like working with Kusama kind of come into play. Is these are kind of like environments that you can kind of like get things up and running a lot quicker with, and kind of iterate on a lot faster, and also experiment with, and then kind of like validate that things kind of things work, the ideas are good, so on and so forth, before you actually kind of go to maybe a more conservative and stable environment. And that's kind of more so what Polkadot kind of looks like. And then just kind of to touch on a little bit more on Kusama and what it is.
Will,
yeah.
there's just, it hasn't mattered for the last slides, but there's just a couple of gray panels covering your slides a little bit. I don't know if you can see them.
Is that gone now, maybe?
No. Oh, yeah, it's gone now. There's still one at the top, but.
That's like the Zoom stuff on
Okay, cool.
in front of it. But
we can see it fine now, so it's all good.
Gotcha. So just a little bit more about Kusama here is kind of proof of stake based network, and this is secured by all these Kusama validators. And it being kind of this proof of stake based network, there's kind of this stake that is kind of securing the network for these chains more or less. And this is kind of this economic security that kind of is given, where in order to actually like roll back any kinds of transactions, or in order to actually kind of like say double spend or things along those lines, you need to have like a lot of funds to actually kind of like subvert those types of things. And so the cost of actually doing so is incredibly expensive, just because of the amount of value that's kind of currently staked by all those different validators. And so people that are building out kind of these substrate-based chains, they can attach as parachains, and all these kind of parachains kind of inherit this economic security of Kusama, which is kind of this relay chain. And so this is kind of like one of the main benefits there. The other is kind of like interoperability between parachains, but also like these bridge chains. So for example, there's like a bunch of teams working on like Bitcoin bridges, Ethereum bridges, just for the bridges to other different blockchains. And so these are just kind of like features that all these different kind of parachains can then tap into. Lastly, kind of there is this multi-tiered governance system with like an on-chain treasury. And I won't touch on this too much, but here's kind of just like a diagram that kind of explains the process of it a little bit. Basically, you have people kind of like in the community that can vote on stuff, but also people that act as these like democratically elected council members that can vote on stuff. This is how upgrades usually will go through, is it will get voted on by both groups usually. And then also there's like an on-chain treasury that can have funds where people kind of submit proposals to and people vote on whether they think they should pass or not. And so it's a lot of just interesting community kind of participation there and actually kind of how these networks get run, which is pretty cool. This image here then is kind of like a bird's eye view of what maybe this relay chain kind of looks like, and all the different parachains kind of connected to it. You have kind of these parachain slots, and these would be kind of these teams building out their own blockchains. They run these entities called like collators, which are kind of block producers. These collators will submit blocks into the relay chain to the relay chain validators, and those validators actually finalize them on the relay chain. So once it's kind of finalized on this relay chain, those transactions cannot be reverted. But basically the idea is that there's just a lot of these different entities that kind of will have participation or run things. There's a lot of kind of things to be run of kind of like validator nodes, collator nodes, RPC nodes, just a whole bunch of kind of people in this space that kind of come together to create this like this Web3 ecosystem of sorts. To touch a little bit more on Parachain, just because these are kind of like the main users of like Kusama, I would say, is interoperable kind of blockchains connected to a relay chain. As I mentioned, they kind of inherit this economic security. But in order to kind of get these benefits, they need to get a Parachain slot. And what this is you're basically depositing a certain amount of KSM for Kusama or DOT for Polkadot. And this is kind of a opportunity cost to actually have a slot on the relay chain for a period of time. So it's kind of like a lease. And then at the end of this lease, those tokens are returned to the chain or people that kind of contributed to it. And so basically the opportunity cost is that if you're not running, or if you're not staking, if you're not kind of like backing validators or running a validator yourself, those entities in that sense are earning more kind of KSM and DOT via inflation and like APY there. Or there's like other opportunities to do this with DeFi and whatnot. But if you lock things up in like a Parachain slot, then this can't be used for anything else. And so it's kind of like this opportunity cost that people are putting is kind of like a bid to participate in these networks. In order to actually kind of participate as a Parachain, they have to get a slot, and these slots are done via auctions. So these slots are actually done kind of like for lease periods. So each lease period is 6 weeks. And then teams can kind of like bid for a max of 8 weeks. And so for Kusama, this is the kind of like this time period, but Polkadot is actually like 4 times longer. And this is, as I kind of mentioned, Kusama is more so this faster moving experimental network where things, you could like iterate on things faster. And this is just one particular example of like how that plays out. And so in order to actually participate in bid for one of these slots, the Parachain teams will bid with either like their own KSM or KSM that's contributed from a Crowdloan, which I'll touch on in a sec. But basically, at the end of this period, all the KSM is returned, and it's very much like non-custodial. It's like locked into the chain itself. Crowdloans are kind of a way for the community to actually contribute to these Parachains getting a slot, but also a way to kind of usually earn tokens from the Parachain. Just because these things are kind of like an auction-based system, and so the cost to get a Parachain slot is not like, it depends on what other people bid. And so most teams will probably not have like a ton of KSM themselves, or at least kind of like the amounts needed to bid against other teams. And so they'll kind of rely on the community to actually contribute KSM to get to deposit into their slot auction there. And usually they'll get kind of a Parachain token in return. And then at the end of this period, if people contribute to the Crowdloan, when they first do that, they'll get like this Parachain token, but they then also get their KSM back at the end of it. And there also is kind of this opportunity cost if people contribute KSM to this to earn these Parachain tokens. They can't also stake to it, and so it's kind of like a choice of like, okay, should I just stake or should I participate in Crowdloan? Should I try and get some tokens here? That kind of thing. The actual kind of auctions, it's kind of this. They're called candle auctions, and basically it's not really the kind of thing where you could bid a bunch at the last minute and kind of like win these things. If anyone's kind of done any kind of like bidding on eBay before, that's more or less how that works. Is like usually if you're trying to bid for things, usually someone will just come in at the last minute and bid a ton. Usually it's like a bot or something like that, and then always win. To kind of de-incentivize that, we have this candle auction mechanism where there's a starting period of 2 days by which anyone can kind of like start to contribute, but it will only end at some point randomly after like this second kind of like 5-day period. And so people are kind of like encouraged to bid more or less what they think will be like a winning bid, more or less at the start of this period. It will kind of continue on for a little bit. And then once these 5 days end, there will be kind of like a block number that's determined with randomness that will be kind of like snapshotting. Here's kind of where all these different teams bidding for a slot kind of like stand, and here's how much kind of contributed there. And this is kind of what this will look like, at least right now, just because excitingly, these have started this past Tuesday, actually. So this is kind of the first auction is going on right now. To start, there will be 5 auctions kind of back to back. So for the next 5 weeks, there will be 1 auction per week. And then we'll kind of go from there as we kind of scale things up a bit more. But yeah, that's kind of just an overview of Kusama, kind of what it is. Ideally, like people can now participate in these Crowdloans, and so for all these different kind of like substrate and Parachain teams, like Altair kind of launching their chain, actually kind of like contributing to the Crowdloans and that kind of thing, I think is the best way to get involved here. So.
Great, thank you so much, Will. That was really informative, and I think we'll pass to Cassidy now to present Altair, and then we'll circle back to questions that were coming up for you when we open the AMA officially in terms of the question part. So yeah, thanks a lot. And Cassidy.
Hey, excuse my just out of bed appearance today. I'm gonna share my slides. Let's see. It says loading. Can you see this?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Okay. Thank you, Will, for giving that background on Kusama. I think it's super helpful, especially in understanding this difference between Kusama and Polkadot, that it's really this more experimental area for people that really want to test things out before they even go live on Polkadot. So I think with Kusama, we have this line of expecting chaos, which I think makes it feel really exciting. And I think with Altair plus Kusama, we really want that experimentation to allow for us to push the limits of what we can do. So starting on Altair specifically, what it is. So it is built by the Centrifuge team to finance real world assets. And with Altair, we really want that to, again, push these limits of what asset financing really means. So we want Altair to be the place where the newest experimental features live before they even go live on Centrifuge chain. What this means in practice is experimental types of assets, or even potentially like undiscovered assets. So from art NFTs, like CryptoPunks, for example, to different things that maybe people haven't thought of financing yet, but do have value. So Altair will really try to focus on these sorts of use cases to enable users to tokenize these assets and finance them. So Altair is really the next step from Centrifuge for anyone who's looking to unlock financing for their assets. Hopefully that clears up a lot of these questions of, what is Altair and why is it different from Centrifuge, being one of those main questions that I've seen people ask. And as Will had showed previously, in terms of Rococo comparing to West End and then Kusama comparing to Polkadot, we think Altair compares to Centrifuge in that same way. So being the place where these new features go live in a live environment where that has real value so that we can test these things out before they go to Centrifuge chain. So Altair and Centrifuge will exist together into perpetuity, hopefully, if they're both successful. And we really think that they will be. And I'm super excited to see what we can do with Altair. So one of the larger questions that we've gotten is, how do you contribute KSM to the Altair Crowdloan? So I think, to me, the best option is contributing directly in the Kusama portal. So if you hold KSM, you can contribute directly to the Altair Crowdloan through that portal. If you happen to be using one of these exchanges right now, we've partnered with OKX and Kraken, and more to be announced as well. So this will allow their users to contribute directly to the Crowdloan. So if you have an account here, then you can participate once the Crowdloan is launched. And AIR can either be claimed through the chosen exchange or directly on Altair if you contribute directly. And we have, as Will mentioned, some teams, well, I guess most of the ones that I've seen now are rewarding those that lock KSM for the Parachain slot. So for every one KSM that's locked for the 48-week duration that Altair will be bidding on, we will reward 50+ AIR tokens to those KSM holders. So one of the larger questions that I've seen come up a lot actually is the Centrifuge token snapshot. So the way that we're doing the token genesis on Altair is by taking a snapshot of Centrifuge chain and all of the Centrifuge token holders. So this will take place approximately between July 15th and July 17th, and a randomly chosen block will be used for that snapshot. And then AIR will be generated on Altair to all of the corresponding addresses in the first upgrade that happens on Altair. So in order to be included in the snapshot, a token holder must hold tokens on Centrifuge chain in a normal account, a multi-sig account, or a proxy account. So it can be any of those types of accounts, but you do need to hold the tokens on chain, on Centrifuge chain specifically. So we do have this bridge that's live to Ethereum, and token holders can move Centrifuge tokens over to Ethereum as ERC20 tokens. So those tokens would not be included in the snapshot, just as a note there. Tokens that are locked or vesting will still be included in the snapshot. So it doesn't matter if they are locked or if they're unvested, they will still be included. But if you are an investor or an asset originator in TinLake and you've earned liquidity rewards and you have not claimed them on chain, then this will not be included in the snapshot. So do make sure to claim your liquidity rewards before this July 15th date. So then air will be generated to these corresponding addresses on Altair to that token holder. So our timeline of events, just roughly giving an idea of sort of what to expect. We don't have a specific date for our Crowdloan opening yet, so please sign up to be the first to know when this Crowdloan opens. We can send that link to sign up in the chat shortly. But just as a note, we are interested in getting ready before auction 4 starts. So that would be July 6th. So we see that as the first opportunity for Altair to actually enter one of the auctions on Kusama. And then if we were to win that auction 4, that launches on July 13th. So I would see that as the first opportunity for Altair to actually launch. Then the snapshot would be taken after that. So July 15th through 17th is when that random block will be chosen for the snapshot. And then that will be part of the upgrades that are rolled out on Altair beginning the end of July, roughly. So just an overview of what this launch process looks like. I think a few other teams are taking this sort of approach. So our approach is launching with a stripped down runtime. So what that means is that a lot of these functionalities are not going to be enabled yet. Although they will exist on Altair, they won't be live. So once Altair is running smoothly, probably for around a week, although it could be shorter than that, it could be longer than that. So no promises there, but just a rough idea for you all. That's when we'll begin the process of upgrades. And so the first upgrade will be a migration of state. And what that specifically will be, I think of interest for you all, is the balances themselves. So the balances from the snapshot and the Crowdloan participation will be part of the first upgrade. And then we will add external collators and staking. Then governance will be enabled. So this includes council elections and democracy. Excuse me. And then the removal of the pseudo key. And finally, we will allow balance transfers for air holders to be able to transfer tokens, though this process is subject to change. So you may get balance transfers a bit earlier than this step number 5, but no promises there. And I think this is probably a good indication of what our launch process will look like. So that is all that I have for my prepared slides.
Great, thank you, Cassidy. And yeah, I think there are a lot of the basic questions that have been coming through covered. And now we're going to make time for questions for both our speakers, Will and Cassidy. We've had a lot of questions come through on Twitter and the forum, so we'll prioritize them. And then we obviously have a lot coming through in the chat. So I think we've got over 100 questions. So we won't be able to get to all of them. So Helena, can you kick us off with something a bit more, zoom out again?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Right. So Will, this one's for you. Can you explain more about the rationale for Polkadot building Kusama, and why did you decide to go with the auction strategy?
Sure. So kind of touched on this a little bit before, but basically we kind of like need these environments to actually kind of see that things work, see that things kind of are validated without kind of everything breaking at once. And so we kind of are seeing Kusama is kind of this chain that like hedges the risk for Polkadot. And I guess not just like hedging the risk for Polkadot, but hedging the risk for kind of like all the attached kind of parachains for Polkadot in the future. And so the idea is just that we want to have like faster moving networks. Everything related to kind of like time periods is 4 times quicker on Kusama than it is Polkadot. And this also kind of goes with this auction strategy as well. So this is this idea of these candle auctions. It's supposed to be somewhat of a more kind of like fair approach to actually having an auction, as opposed to kind of like everyone just bidding at the last minute. You would probably get like a better rough approximation of what these things actually look like, kind of like in the middle of it, as opposed to everything at the end. And everyone kind of won't have this like FOMO at the very last minute to be like, oh, is this winning? Is this not winning? You hopefully will get like a better rough sense of like what these auctions actually kind of look like as they're kind of happening, I would say. So.
Nice,
Cool.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Okay, Cassidy, we have one. Quite challenging. In one sentence, what differentiates this project, Altair, from other projects on Kusama?
I would say, well, I'm not sure how much the person that's asking this question knows about the other projects on Kusama, but all these projects are quite different. I would say one of the themes is that a lot of them do happen to be sort of in that DeFi area, which is pretty cool to see. I think it's just a really great use case for the technology that we have. But all of the projects that are launching on Kusama are quite different. So for example, you have Akala that's doing a stable coin, basically. And we're really excited about the potential to integrate with Akala and use their stable token to finance different assets on Altair or Centrifuge. Moonbeam is allowing people to bring their contracts that exist on Ethereum over to the Polkadot ecosystem really easily. And so they're creating tools for people to be able to do this, right in Solidity, for example, but still deploy on Polkadot. And I think that's really exciting, but again, like super different from what Altair is doing. So Altair specifically is being able to finance your assets on chain. So that is tokenizing your assets. And with Altair, as compared to Centrifuge, really focusing on those more experimental types of assets. And then any functionality that we're interested in bringing over to Centrifuge, that would launch on Altair first and really go through the ringer, so to say, before it goes live on Centrifuge chain.
Just to also add on to that, I guess, like a lot of these different projects really work as kind of maybe someone that's either like just a user or someone that's building things even just on top of them. They really work well more so like together as opposed to kind of like separate things. And that's really where kind of this interoperability kind of comes in, is that like if someone wants to kind of utilize maybe like one of these other parachains doing things related to like privacy preserving things, maybe you could like do transactions from this other parachain into that one. Or if there's more so like other DeFi related chains, you could use assets from Altair as kind of maybe collateral or something to take out lending or anything like that. It just kind of creates these like composable building blocks that just enable more use cases and more kind of just primitives to actually like build things. And so it's going to be just really cool to see kind of like how all these things kind of come together, especially just because like a lot of these different chains have their own kind of like specific niche use cases and features and kind of products to them.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so my next one, just following on to that, is there a real world asset which you'd like to see on Altair? And what's the craziest kind of real world asset you can think of? So I guess Cassidy, you go first, and then I'd love to hear from Will, your opinion too.
Gosh, that's a tough one. Like a crazy asset. I feel like I don't feel creative at this moment. I would kind of change it and I would say I'm more interested actually in the crypto native assets for Altair specifically. And like, I don't know, for some reason, I'm really interested in financing a CryptoPunk on Altair. I think that would be really cool. I don't know if and when we'll get there, but that's something that I'm excited about.
Yeah, for me, I think it's like, I don't know, right now, I think we've already seen kind of a lot of these things kind of come about where I think, I don't know, past year or two, it's like Tim Berners-Lee is selling the source code to the original like internet stuff he was making as an NFT. Everyone's already kind of like, I think, done all the crazy things. So it's really hard to say. It's like, okay, what's next, you know? but to me, it's like right now people have kind of been making these like primitives of stuff, but it's like maybe like the combination of a bunch of things kind of looks interesting as like an NFT. Like for example, if you're an artist and you kind of like create like a bunch of different assets together, you could create like your like a curated portfolio as like a single NFT, and then could do other maybe crazy things of like fractionalizing it so that multiple people own part of a collection, but it's like a cohesive collection. I don't know, things like that. I think will be a little bit more interesting in the near future.
Cool. Well, maybe some of the people in this AMA tonight will, get on there as soon as it's launched with some crazy real world asset ideas and maybe make them reality. I think now let's move a little bit. There's quite a few questions around the air token, and I just want to ask, Cassidy to start, and Will, if you want to add. There's a question coming through in our forum that said, as with other Parachain Crowdloans, Altair will offer air tokens as an incentive for our KSM. Given air token is new and we won't know how much they will be worth in 48 weeks time, what would you say to anyone who is looking to crowdloan so that they stake their KSM with you?
I would say that is a super tough question, because they're right, there is no value for the air token. And one correction I would make there though is that you don't get all of the air at the end of that 48 weeks, but you get it 25% will be liquid from the beginning of launch, and then the rest will be distributed over the entire length of the slot on a linear basis. So in terms of actually making that decision, I think it's really about understanding what the projects are doing. So every project that you're looking at contributing KSM to their Parachain slot, do you think that this is a project that's going to be valuable? Do you think it's a project that is, I mean, for lack of a better word, maybe that you trust that their team is actually able to deliver on what they've talked about? So have you taken a look at the technology if you're able to dive that deep? And if you can't, can you find information from people that have? So one of the indicators even is, for example, if this team has gotten a grant from the Web3 Foundation, because Web3 has supported a lot of great projects in this space already. And I think for me, that would be a great indicator of teams that I would think can actually execute on the ideas that they've put out there. So just a few thoughts, but again, nothing, it's hard to say anything definitive there, and it's definitely a risk, but hopefully a risk that a lot of people are willing to take.
And for me, the mandatory disclaimer of like, I'm not a financial advisor, this isn't financial advice, but a lot of time it's like the same things of kind of back in the ICO days of like, okay, should I spend my ETH for a bunch of these projects? What's the value of them? Is there any kind of like, what does this look like? And for most of them, at least I would say like the best ones, like just doing due diligence. And so like, what are they actually doing? What kind of tokenomics do they have? Like, is this token actually kind of useful in whatever they're doing? And like, is this team actually kind of like building things? Just because I've seen a lot where it's just kind of like teams are trying to raise money. It's like they have no GitHub, they have no like public code, things like that. It's really hard to actually know what people are kind of up to unless you dig a bit deeper. But I think like just one of the benefits of this just building things on Substrate and whatnot is the way of doing like upgrades and whatnot is a lot easier than if you're kind of like doing things in the more older sense of like, okay, I have a chain, I want to add new things, I have to hard fork and have everybody upgrade to this new fork and stuff. Substrate has this thing of kind of these forkless like runtime upgrades. So it's like, say you add new features and new kinds of things to actually include in there, it's a lot easier to actually iterate on things and add more functionality and add more utility kind of as things go on. And so I would say that's kind of like a bet of like looking into these teams, do they have maybe like the creativity or kind of like technical knowledge to actually kind of implement new things and have maybe these Parachain tokens be more valuable kind of as time goes on.
Nice, thank you. And actually, I have a question for you, Will, but I'd also like to hear Cassidy's thoughts too after. What do you think is the biggest benefit Altair will add to the Kusama network?
I think it's a lot of like, as kind of mentioned before, these niche like use cases is kind of like all these teams kind of like like trying to focus on maybe like small specific things. I haven't really seen other kind of teams do things like in the real world necessarily as much in that regard. I think the other kind of thing that touches the real world as well as kind of this like robonomics project, which is trying to do things with like real world robots and stuff like that. But just in terms of like real world assets, I haven't really seen anybody else kind of like doing that as much. And so I think that's kind of like a useful and interesting primitive to kind of like use and kind of like as a kind of composable thing with all these other different kind of projects.
Nice. And Cassidy, your thoughts?
I guess building on that idea of composable, and you mentioned earlier interoperability. I think that's definitely something that Centrifuge has been really focused on, and Altair will continue to focus on, and that's really integrating with tons of different projects in the Kusama ecosystem. And I think the more interoperability and integrations that there are, the greater the flow of financing, of liquidity in DeFi is going to be. And that will only benefit not only the DeFi ecosystem in general, but also I think when it comes down to the individual borrowers, just having more and more access to financing. And I think that's, for me, one of the best things that Altair will bring to the ecosystem is the access.
Cool. Thanks a lot. And thanks for all the questions coming in. There's a lot and we won't be able to get to all of them. And we will have a community call in 2 weeks' time where we can talk about some of these questions that are slightly outside the scope of tonight's call. But I want to ask quite a technical question, which I guess I'll direct to you first, Cassidy. I think it comes from one of our ambassadors, Pat's. So like TinLake dApp is built on ETH, which is using chains safe, was bridged to Centrifuge chain. Will we see substrate built dApp features being built on Altair to access liquidity across KSM and the DOT ecosystem? For example, Karura, Akala, and others.
I think if I understand the question directly, it's really a question on if we're going to be able to move our TinLake dApp from Ethereum, where it exists today, to Altair. And yes, it's definitely the plan. That's our next big project that I'm excited about, is moving TinLake from its home today on Ethereum to Altair first, testing it out on Altair, and then moving TinLake over to Centrifuge chain. So both Altair and Centrifuge would still be able to access the Ethereum DeFi ecosystem by nature of them being parachains and connected to Kusama and Polkadot that will have bridges to Ethereum. But I think it's super important that TinLake the dApp is able to exist natively on these chains, and that's really one of the main purposes that that these chains will serve, is holding that TinLake dApp. So yes, that will go live on Altair, and it'll go live on Altair before it goes live on Centrifuge chain.
Just to kind of add on to that, like a lot of what we see, at least like from Parity, like our mentality is kind of, there's a lot of things that are already really awesome and really great kind of built in these other ecosystems. For example, like all this kind of DeFi stuff on Ethereum, if you just kind of like copy and paste it somewhere else, you lose liquidity, it loses kind of like all the functionality really. And so what we're just really interested in is kind of like creating environments where kind of you could have a lot of these bridges that you could just kind of like funnel liquidity kind of back and forth to multiple different places, just so that like for bridges to Ethereum, for example, bridges to Bitcoin, bridges to other chains in general, substrate to substrate bridges, so they're eventually will be like a bridge from Polkadot to Kusama, which will be kind of wacky. But basically just having all these things be able to interact with each other, still retain kind of the functionality, still kind of be able to tap into like these liquidity sources in these multiple chains. That's something that like we're devoting like a lot of resources into as well. And so I think that's going to be just awesome to see kind of like how all these different things kind of play together, whether it's like a Ethereum dApp living on Ethereum, maybe Ethereum EVM kind of based Solidity stuff on like Moonbeam or Akala or whatnot. All these things just kind of working together will be really fun to see.
Nice. And just following up with another technical question, and this one's for you, Will. Are all Kusama parachains communicating with each other successfully?
So this will happen soon. Right now, kind of we're still kind of finalizing some of the things, and kind of like it's called like XCM or kind of cross-chain messaging. A lot of this kind of works currently, but we're still kind of just continually fleshing this out a bit more. So at the start of kind of some of these parachains launching, that functionality won't be there kind of like 100%. But as kind of time goes on, we add kind of more things incrementally to Kusama, see that it works, it doesn't break. That's kind of like as that mentality of kind of like more experimentalness kind of comes out, is kind of like this kind of like slow rollout of kind of testing things. Does this work? Iterate on it, kind of so on and so forth. And so it'll be the case where it's kind of like substrate to substrate based kind of messaging, but also cross-chain messaging between, say, like Kusama and Polkadot or other different chains as well. That will happen as well.
Great, thank you. Some really detailed answers coming through. There's a question that came through, Cassidy. Will air holders vote on certain features or assets of Altair? Or what will these votes be?
So the votes would be, for example, similar to what we started gradually introducing on Centrifuge chain, like the liquidity rewards for having both bringing assets and DAI liquidity to Tinlink. And so our first vote there went on chain, and that's pretty exciting, I think. So that's an example of one of the things that could be voted on Altair as well. It could also be different features, so different runtime upgrades that have a specific set of features. That would be something that's voted on through democracy on chain. In the future, this could be a lot more experimental. And I think maybe in the beginning, it won't be quite as controversial, and the votes may go really smoothly because it'll be stuff that sort of makes sense maybe from the very beginning. But I think very quickly we'll probably reach an area where there will be more experimental types of features that people will be able to vote on, that token holders will be able to vote on Altair. And hopefully the community can also bring a lot to Altair. New ideas, and maybe even start building their own dApps and putting that up for vote to introduce to Altair. So really looking forward to that sort of growth. I think we're headed in that direction quite quickly, maybe quicker than we think.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so following on from that, I guess, about how like the community can get involved. How does a non-holder of Kusama or DOT participate? For example, if they are active in Tinlake and have CFG, can they utilize that asset in the process?
Well, I think one of the larger ways that Centrifuge users and holders benefit from Altair specifically is that these things are getting tested on Altair first. So that's really the place where things can go wrong before they go wrong on Centrifuge chain. And I think that was honestly the largest reason for making Altair, for putting it together, getting it live before Centrifuge chain goes live with its Parachain, is really to test all of this stuff first and make sure that if there's anything that would create unknowns or some sort of issue, that we can get that figured out with Altair first. So that does make Altair more risky inherently. It makes Kusama more risky inherently than Polkadot, but I think it also makes it really exciting and gives a lot of opportunities that don't exist on Centrifuge or Polkadot.
Great. Anything to add there, Will, or shall I move on to the last words?
Yeah, I think like a lot of the cases of kind of like participation will kind of be like holding some of these tokens, at least kind of like in the sense of like supporting that via like auctions or crowd loans or those types of things. But just in general, kind of like holding things and being active in the community just also really helps, because a lot of like these things are so much like driven by the communities. For example, like the governance things for Polkadot and Kusama, I would say like the majority of the way that these processes actually kind of work is just by a bunch of people in like forums online, like talking about stuff. Many of them don't even have tokens, but they have like interesting ideas. And so the way that those all kind of like contribute together steers the way that kind of like development happens, the way that kind of like funding happens, the way that projects launch new features, etc. And so I would say kind of just like participating in these communities is also just a really great way to kind of contribute there.
Cool. Thanks, Will. And I definitely agree. In the ecosystem at Centrifuge, yeah, we're starting to see more and more participation from community, people kind of asking for what they would like to see, proposing things, and that's definitely the really good first steps into becoming a decentralized community. But for the purposes of this AMA, I'd just love to hand to both of you for any last words, any last things that you think we need to cover in these last couple of minutes. Cassidy, if you can start, and then I'll pass to Will.
Cool. I guess, I mean, this is sort of it's a cutting edge thing, right? We're really pushing forward with something new, and it's totally natural to have tons of questions. And so that's why we wanted to host this AMA and try to clarify as much as we could. So if you still have questions, definitely feel free to reach out in Telegram or Discord. We definitely want to clear up as much as we can here, and understand that it is complicated. But hopefully you feel really excited about the potential here, because I certainly do. And I think that's one of the things that gets me really motivated about this project, is really seeing the potential that's there. And I hope that we've conveyed at least a little bit of that here today.
Yeah, for me, I think it's seeing just all these different kind of like teams and developers and just token holders and just people in the space just kind of start to kind of like come together because of these events of like, okay, now these things are launching. Everyone kind of just like continually building stuff, just kind of like the amount of participation just across the board has been just really awesome to see. I think right now is a pretty exciting time, just because these things are kind of first starting to now start to run in like live production. Polkadot and Kusama has been kind of like in the works for like years now, and so seeing it actually kind of like work is pretty crazy. Like the amount of code and the amount of kind of things coming together is I wouldn't expect it to work, but it does. So that's really nice to see. Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me. This was really fun to answer some questions here, and yeah, looking forward to seeing everyone kind of in the space work on all these things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will, for being our guest of honor on this AMA. It's been, yeah, a really good call, full of some hard questions and great answers. And thanks, Helena, for co-hosting, and of course Cassidy, who's doing an amazing job at Centrifuge. So we'll call it there, but we are seeing this question coming through a few times around option 2 coinless buyers, and so we'll just ensure that's answered before we end the call. So thanks a lot, Will. Feel free to drop off, and Cassidy, if you can stay on and answer this question about option 2 coin list buyers. Thanks, Will.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Will. So the question here, I guess it's a little bit more of a technical question. I think CoinList will reach out to all of the users that participated in their sale about creating accounts on Centrifuge chain. So hopefully that'll clear up any confusion there in terms of, if your CoinList account has an address on Centrifuge chain, it should. And so I think CoinList is the best person to ask there for any info from them directly. But as long as you create an address on Centrifuge chain to receive your Centrifuge tokens, even if they're locked, so I believe option 2 was the locked option, but whichever one was the locked one, that doesn't matter. Even if they're locked, they will be included in the snapshot. So just make sure that you pay attention to any email that's coming through from CoinList, and any questions that they can clarify, please do direct to them. But then you can also feel free to ask any follow-up questions once you get more info there in our Telegram or Discord. Happy to answer more there.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone in the crowd for joining us. We'll be collecting all of these questions that weren't answered or couldn't be tonight, and we'll try to do something there, maybe a blog post with some highlights. Cool, I'm pausing.